It's broke, don't need a 4-heater, but you come 4 feet approach me. I'm summoning focus of Gogeta. Slight work, so imagine me chilling when folks meet up, cause my.
Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. Today we're going to be talking about WWEEVIL episode 5, Randy Orton. Now, they talked a lot about Randy Orton, and I say nothing works as a commercial for this show more than the first minute of the Randy Orton episode, in which Randy Orton goes to that place and his face just mutates, and we have the look of Randy Orton that we've known since like 2009 of, the vicious, violent facial expression of Randy Orton, that great visual. That is the best, minute of advertising for this entire series, is to be able to see somebody like Randy Orton tell the story of where that came from and how he gets there. So Randy Orton, of course, has to tell multiple different stories because, of course, there's a legend killer evolution version of Randy Orton, which is, as he basically told his life story. And then there is the Viper Randy Orton. Now, when it comes to the legend killer, as far as characters is concerned, I liked the legend killer. I loved the legend killer. It was all ego. It was all young, brash, future legend by making his name on the legend of others. It was 100% young punk stuff. I loved it. Even though I wasn't watching it live when it occurred, I went back and watched it and it was like, man, this Randy Orton dude, he's really good. He's really good. And hey, Harley Race and Mick Foley and Jake the Snake Roberts playing along and letting this guy spit in their face, and they're taking RKOs to really put this kid over. And not just that, but the older women is like Moolah, and some of the other women are doing it too. They're really working hard to get young Randy Orton over. And it was fantastic. It was really good. And it played into very heavily into Randy Orton's potential. And potential is a tough thing. And sometimes we saddle kids with the concept of being gifted or having potential, because then the expectations come in. And Randy Orton's one of those guys where if you look at his story, you saw that the expectations, he was falling way short of them. They wanted Randy Orton to be world champion at 24 years old. He was that good in the ring. He had the right character. He was the right guy. But then you put him in a situation where he has to talk to some dweeb with a microphone. He wants to intimidate the guy. He takes the microphone, he throws it. He threatens to beat up a guy. He's constantly failing drug tests. He's, being obnoxious. He's being a dickhead. And he's, misbehaving in terms of his relationships with his coworkers. It just wasn't fitting, and you could see like he was just incredibly immature, and that took him off the rails to where they really had a general idea of what they wanted from Randy Orton, but he was never going to be able to give it at that stage of his life, because his ego wasn't just, he could play an arrogant heel, because he essentially was an arrogant heel. That's just who he was at that time. And so while I love the legend killer, from a perspective of, what the things that he did and the places he was willing to go and how he stretched the character in order to be able to do the hardcore stuff in the bloody cage match with Ric Flair. They don't talk enough about that match. That Ric Flair and Randy Orton cage match from Taboo Tuesday, was it 05? That match, it was tremendous. Another one of those matches that took Randy Orton to the next level, that really put him over as being a future legend, that this guy has so much potential. He's gifted. He's so smooth in the ring. And then you see Randy Orton does something stupid and it kind of throws everything for a loop. And so he was a guy who, if you look at his history, whenever pressure was on him, he cracked. He went to boot camp. It didn't really work out. He cracked under that pressure. So WWE at the time Well, WWE, because that's the only place he's ever worked. He never worked for WWF. You have this young guy who is cracking under the pressure of his own greatness and what people really want from him. And it's not really working out. So this kind of segues into the intermittent explosive disorder, the IED storyline that they created. This was born, I believe, in 2008, 2009, maybe 2000. Yeah, because I think he was still a Legend Killer or some version of the Legend Killer in 2007. So when he started getting slender and cutting all his hair off and all that sort of stuff, and he kicked Vince McMahon in the head, and then they blamed it on him having a mental problem, the intermittent explosive disorder. And he can't be fired because he can't fire people with mental illnesses. Now, mental illness is one of those things that is very close to my heart. And the character of Randy Orton adopting a mental illness, for some people, and maybe even in the modern world, it would be a very touchy subject. But for me, I know why, why would somebody with a mental illness is a heel, and why do we constantly do that? Why do we constantly have Batman villains who have mental illnesses? They have extreme bipolar disorder, they're sociopaths, extreme depression. Why? Why is this always the case that we pick on the mentally ill and choose them to be our villains in these stories? Like, why can't we have, mentally ill heroes? Why can't you have a hero with schizophrenia? Now, the truth is you probably could have a character that is a hero with schizophrenia or intermittent explosive disorder or whatever the case may be. You can do it. But the reason why they end up being villains so often is because the one thing about mental illness is that it creates unpredictability. That is the number one thing that you will learn in working with people who have mental illness. They are unpredictable. 1 minute, you're their best friend. They love you. Everything works out. They're willing to name their kids after you. You're backslapping and you're laughing. You have one argument. You never know what could happen after that. You have one disagreement. You're not sure whether you're safe around them anymore. They have behaviors that are very, very weird. Often people think of people with schizophrenia, they talk to themselves, but it's not just that they talk to themselves, they also answer themselves. Somebody with bipolar disorder, they may have these extreme mood swings, especially in males who have bipolar disorder. They get violent. They can go from manic, your best friend, hey, let's go buy a drink, let's go get some weed, let's go do yada, 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 to ready to run up on you and pull a knife on you. Just absolutely insane. That's the scary thing. And that's what makes it so hard for people to depict people with mental illnesses as being good guys. Because when your brain shut off, or when your brain is damaged, it very rarely damages for the good. It almost always damages for the bad. Nobody ever has a psychotic break that makes them a better person. Every time somebody has a psychotic break, it makes them worse people. Almost every time. I've never heard of somebody having a psychotic break that actually fixed their personality. But I've heard hundreds of stories of, man, he was just fine, and then one day, it was over. Completely different person. And sometimes you will get those freaky instances where a person will flip in the same day. Like depression is one of those things where it's long term. But you'll have the bipolar disorder, those mood swings. Man, it'll be in the same day sometimes. And working with people with mental illness, man, I can tell you straight up, it is scary. And it can be. You can't let your guard down. You have to be alert at all the time. Because even if they chilling and they cool and everything is cool, you just never know when they're just tired of something happening. Water is dripping. I can't deal with that. They just start getting antsy. They're tired of somebody else talking. Somebody's having fun over here and they laughing and giggling and joking. And you're like, man, shut the fuck up. There's something There's that unpredictable nature. And then when we look at, villains and different individuals who have mental illnesses, when we get that stuff, that's the scary thing that people add to the story. The Joker, number one character when you think of character with mental illness that is, considered evil, the Joker. What makes the Joker scary is the Joker is unpredictable. And it's cloaked in being cartoonish, the Joker gas, the laughing gas. Like, who the hell wants to create laughing gas? The Joker does. It's completely unpredictable. Like robbing banks and stuff like that, that could be predictable behavior if you're a gangster like Two-Face or a Penguin or something like that. But if you're somebody like Joker, nobody knows what your goals are, what your motivations are. You just woke up today different from yesterday, and every day I feel like doing something different. I'm just going to do it. There's no real motive to it. There's no rhyme or reason for it. Now, that's a really, really, really extreme case of somebody with a mental illness. Usually people with mental illnesses, they may do something. They'll minimize it later, or they'll feel like they're justified later. But they at least know why they did it. At least they'll know why they did it. And it's very hard sometimes to get people to understand that people with mental illnesses aren't necessarily scary, aren't necessarily a threat to you, but they can be, and because they can be, they often end up getting cast as villains. And the Randy Orton story is that he got this intermittent explosive disorder that makes him do all of these weird things, and he hears voices in his head. And they just took this whole schizophrenic concept and they plugged it into the Randy Orton character. And Randy Orton was, in the documentary, it's like the voices in his head are naysayers or doubters. It's self-doubt. It's all these different things, all the haters and different people floating around in his head telling him what he can and can't do. And we all have that. The difference between a schizophrenic and you and me is that they also will talk to that person. If you don't, I know way too many people with mental illnesses, and I've worked with people with mental illnesses. It is frightening to not be able to trust your own thoughts, to think somebody is talking to you and they're not. And then when you're sitting there not knowing what they're hearing in their own brain, because nobody else saying anything, they're thinking up stuff. It could be anything, and what they might do if one of these voices says, hey, this is what it needs to be. This is what's happening. This is what's going on. So this Randy Orton with intermittent explosive disorder and schizophrenia it's an interesting gambit. I don't know if they could have got away with it today. They've downplayed it quite a bit, of course, by just kind of transitioning Randy outside of the intermittent explosive disorder, mental illness. I hear voices in my head. They talk to me and I understand. They kind of moved away from that. It's just kind of a theme song now. It doesn't really play into his character anymore. But that's what makes it so scary. And that's what makes people with mental illnesses the bad guys all the time. It's just that unpredictability. You just never know whether they're going to be your best friend or your worst enemy or someone who's going to try to hurt you. Or in some cases, somebody's going to try to seduce you. A lot of people don't understand that too. And when it comes to mental illness, sex is experiences in general become a very important thing. They become really attached to taste and senses and stuff like that. So that's why, maybe in a mental hospital or something, they might serve ice cream all the time or yogurt or something like that because they have a heightened sense of taste. And also because it helps with the medications and stuff like that. You'll have that sort of situation. You'll also have, there has to be radios. There has to be music around. TVs have to be loud, because you have to drown out the voices. So the TV has to be loud to drown out the voices. So that you're watching TV and it's not, the voices talking to you. there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, and that unpredictability and that danger, it's real. It is real. But like I was saying about sex is another one. A lot of people who have bipolar disorder, they have unbalanced sexual behaviors too, especially males, especially females, I should say, rather. A lot of what we see, in reckless female behavior is indirect self-harming. I remember, I forget where I saw this before, but a lot of people say like the desire to have sex with like multiple different partners, especially in the same week or something like that, is a sign of really low self-esteem. And in a way, it is self-harming. Putting yourself in danger, putting yourself at risk without, recognizing that danger or that risk is problematic. And you see it in men too. It's not just women. You see it in guys too, specifically homosexual guys. They will have bipolar disorder, crazy mood swings, and they'll have lots of unprotected sex, or they'll get, engage in sex very often, or men already are genetically predisposed to high risk behavior, so they'll increase their risks. They may start doing hard drugs. They may start drinking a lot. They may start doing all these other things, including the part of the drugs and the alcohol is going to be self-medicating, trying to stop the voices, trying to control your own behavior. You're antsy, you're anxious. You can't sit down. You can't calm down. So you may take something to try to calm yourself down, and you just become addicted to it. So mental illness is very, it's one of those things where, yes, it is unfairly maligned in terms of, heel characters are always crazy, bad guys are always crazy. We need to stop the stigma of mental illness. And it's like, to a degree, I understand, but you have to understand the reality of people with mental illnesses, and that archetype exists for a reason. The schizo, it exists for a reason, because that's really what people are. That's not mythology. Like there's a lot of stuff that's in WWE EVIL or that I talk about on this channel that's just pure mythology. The concept of good guys and bad guys, heroes and villains, angels and devils, all that kind of stuff it's pure mythology. You can find that in any textbook on mythology, Joseph Campbell or whatever. But something like mental illness, where somebody's not right, there's a spiritual aspect to it. Just to continue this a little bit, our first prisons in the United States was because the people of that time believed that criminals were under demon possession. That's how mental illness was portrayed in the past. You were possessed by the devil. You were possessed by demons. And these demons made you do horrible things. And because you were possessed by these demons, you either needed to be exorcised or isolated. And we learned that both of those things are terrible ways to fix human beings. Exorcisms often led to people being beaten to death or starved to death or abused and, something like that. And the concept of isolating just drives people crazy, because if we're human beings, we are meant to be social animals. We lock each other into cages for long periods of time. The mental capacity starts to degrade, and next thing you know, you're out of your fucking mind. And so that's why the first prisons in the United States, where they were all basically isolate the devil, the demon possessed people from everyone else, so the demons won't leave them and go to other people. That's what the general idea. And it was just this belief that thieves and rapists and murderers and these kinds of people were possessed by the devil. Whether you believe that or not is up for your own personal debate. That was the general idea of the first prisons in the United States. It was obviously wrongdoers, people who hurt others, people who rape, people who steal. They are possessed by the devil. Now, clearly, those people didn't have the language and didn't really understand it. To be quite honest, we still don't really understand it as fully as we should about the nature of why people do bad stuff. We always make excuses. about why people do bad stuff. We don't ever look at the incentive structure to why we do bad things. And I don't want to get too political on you, because right now we're just kind of talking about the nature of mental illness and why people who are mentally ill are considered to be bad guys, or why they always end up as the villains. But most of the time, what makes somebody like the Joker a villain is we don't understand the incentive. You know, that's the real meat and potatoes of the subject. Is people steal because it's easier than going to work. It's simple incentive structure. Or they may make more money stealing or selling drugs than they would working. Simple incentive structure. No devils needed, no demons needed. We don't need to go into all of that. It's an incentive structure. If it's easier to steal, people will steal. If you can make more money stealing than you can working, people will steal. If they need money fast, they're more likely to do something illegal because they can get it fast. But what about the incentive structure of somebody who is insane? What is the incentive structure of somebody who has a problem and does something that is absolutely against, in some cases, their own best interest? We don't understand that. And that's part of the fear why people are scared of folks who have mental illnesses. Because, again, that unpredictability goes to also, we don't really understand the motives. We don't really understand the incentive structure. What are you trying to get out of this? You know, when people who are mentally disabled do things, what is the goal of this whole ordeal? Sometimes they can't even tell you themselves. That makes things very uncomfortable for the average person. They don't understand it, you know? And that's another thing that makes people with mental illness, why they end up being the villains, because most people don't understand mental illness. They don't know what it means. You know, it's easier to blame somebody else. The way you often see, you know, high functioning psychopaths, they do something and then they were bullied in high school. Like, I doubt that had anything to do with it. You know, I doubt, they were bullied in high school or whatever had anything to do with it. We don't want to understand, or at least try to understand, that people have different motives and different incentive structures than we have. And we don't fully understand it. And in not fully understanding it, we attribute what we would consider to be the rational course to them. For instance, somebody commits suicide. They'll say, you know, that's not rational. Sometimes people do sit down and think to themselves, I have nothing to live for. And they legitimate do the pros and the cons. I don't have nothing to live for. Or they're in such pain or they're in such suffering that they want to get out of it. And they really don't think too much about it more than that. And then they kill themselves. And then we say, after they're dead, oh, well, it's obviously because he got divorced, or, you know, trans people are mistreated in the streets, or whatever the case may be. It's like we're just attributing what we want the reality of it to be to them. And that's not really always the case. Sometimes it's just a choice that they make. And we wouldn't make the same choice, but we thinking with our brain and they thinking with theirs. So that's one thing that I really just kind of want to discuss. And I think this episode was really a good opportunity to sit down and talk about why, you know, mental illness is often equated with villainy or evil. And it's due primarily to the unpredictable nature of it, our misunderstanding of incentive structures for people with mental illness, and not understanding their motives, and trying to think rationally with people who don't have rational brains. It's really that simple. But the IED storyline was pretty cool. I'm glad they kind of moved away from it. I don't think it had long legs anyway in terms of a character and character motivation. But it's part of the Randy Orton story now. So I guess you could always go back to it. And they kind of do with the Randy's going to that place. Like, yeah, sure, that place. Whatever that may be. But let me know what you guys think of WWEEVIL and what I talked about here today. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys later.
Yeah. We're just gonna